The job today is to replace the fuel rail pressure sensor on this 2007 Ford Mustang 4-liter V6 automatic. Here is a view of the engine bay on the driver's side of the car. The fuel rail pressure sensor is mounted on this side of the engine, so you will be accessing it from the driver's side of the car. Here is the view of the fuel rail pressure sensor. I'll zoom in slowly on it. And the job here is to remove first the vacuum connector, and then the electrical connector, and then these two socket head cap screws. These are Torx bit number 30. So the tools that you will need to do this are a 3/8 inch drive ratchet wrench with a 2 to 6 inch extension and a number 30 Torx bit. Here is a view of the sensor with my ratchet wrench on the cap screw ready to remove it. Now, before you turn these screws out, you should have let the engine cool off, because there's a good possibility when you go to do this job that the fuel rail will still have some pressure in it. When you crack these screws open and go to lift the old pressure sensor out, fuel could come spraying out of the port. You should have rags ready to soak up any fuel spills. To remove the electrical connector, press down on that tab with a screwdriver, as I am showing in this video segment. Push down with the screwdriver and slide the connector to your left. To remove the vacuum connector line, again, use your flat blade screwdriver. It might take a little persuasion. These vacuum connectors can get sticky with age if the car is a few years old. But use your screwdriver blade and push that vacuum connector off to your right. Here is the old fuel rail pressure sensor. Both of the cap screws have been removed, the electrical connector has been removed, and the vacuum connector has been removed. It is ready to be lifted off. Again, have towels or rags ready, because fuel may spray up out of the fuel rail as soon as you loosen that sensor and start lifting it. Okay, there is the exposed fuel rail sensor port. The sensor has been removed. About 2 to 3 tablespoons of gasoline did come bubbling up out of there when I pulled the sensor off. So have the rags ready. And there's the old sensor ready to be disposed of. Okay, the sensor, when you take the new one out of the box, there's going to be an O-ring on the port that pokes down into that large hole in the middle. Grease that O-ring lightly with a little bit of motor oil or wheel bearing grease. Here are the old and new sensors side by side, the new one on the left, the old one on the right. As you always would, look at the old and new parts closely together. Make sure that the auto parts guy sold you the correct part. Once you put that new sensor in and expose it to gasoline, you will not be able to return it if it turns out to be the wrong one. This is a view down into the business end of that electrical connector that goes onto the fuel rail pressure sensor. I recommend that you do this visual inspection before you put everything back together, and make sure that those electrical connectors are nice and clean and shiny copper color. If you see any sign of corrosion, down in that connector, that's a problem that needs to be dealt with because the fuel rail pressure sensor will not work properly if those connectors are dirty. Alright, here is the new sensor installed. The electrical connector is back on, the vacuum connector is back on, and the two cap screws have been torqued to about 15 inch-pounds. It does not take very much torque to fasten those down. When you removed them, you should have taken note of how much torque that you needed to remove them. This is a plastic part that you're putting those screws into, so do not crank down too hard on those screws or you will break the mounting flange. Alright, the job is done. The car started normally. It's idling the way it always has before, and I have checked around that fuel rail pressure sensor port for any signs of fuel leakage, and there were none. So the repair job is complete. Okay, the trouble code that this car was throwing that caused us to do this repair, as you can see, is P0193. The instrument I'm using here is a scan gauge, and I can also, now that I've read the code and installed the new part, I can hit the clear button and clear that code, which will clear it from the car's engine control computer memory. Here is a check of the scan gauge. The engine is idling at 18% load, 4.5 inches or psi of manifold absolute pressure. Temperature is slowly coming up. It's currently 163 Fahrenheit. A scan of the OBD2 codes show no codes, so the new fuel pressure sensor appears to be functioning properly. This repair is completed. Thank you for watching, and again, this was replacement of a fuel rail pressure sensor on a 2007 Ford Mustang 4-liter automatic. Have a good day and be safe.